Hello, everyone. My name is Nolan Johnson. Salamat sa Tarbe Dustur. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm very happy to see so many of you and your interest in learning a little bit about our history. It's such a privilege and an honor for me to share about this with you. So let's start by talking a little bit about the title of my presentation. It says E pluribus unum, which is the kind of is written on the seal of the United States that they created when the United States became independent. E pluribus unum is a Latin phrase which means of many one, of many places, but one nation. And in the beginning, that meant many states joining into one nation. But now we Americans feel that it means we Americans came from many different places, but now we have united as one nation. So that's why I chose the title. I also wanted to share this picture with you. I know that it's kind of hard to see the picture, but basically what it shows is people from all different backgrounds, Native Americans, African Americans, European Americans, all contributing to create and to feed and to nourish a tree. And that tree represents America. It represents our nation. And you can see the sacrifices and the difficulties that all of these different people have gone through in order to create the United States of America and keep the United States of America going. So you can see in that picture, each person is looking out to the tree and a trickle of blood comes from their hand to the tree. And this picture is at my university, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so I actually oftentimes would study in the same room as this picture. So this picture is something I can close my eyes and see it, and I carry it with me wherever I go. So today, this presentation will cover a few different topics, but the main point is that throughout American history, there are three different waves of immigration. Waves of immigration. There's three different groups of immigrants. The first group was from the 1700s to 1880, and this group was kind of expanding the frontier of America when America was still mostly a rural country where most people lived on farms. And most of these immigrants came from Northern and Western Europe. The second wave started in 1880, and it happened at the same time as the industrialization of America, when giant cities were forming all across the United States, in New York and Chicago and other places. Factories were being built, and America became an industrial superpower. That period is from about 1880 to 1914. And then the third wave of immigration, which we'll talk about, which is the immigration that we see happening today, that started in about 1965 to present times. And most of the immigrants during that time come from Asia and Latin America. Now, before talking about immigration and how immigration contributed to American diversity, I want to talk about two very important groups who have also made a huge contribution to the United States and our culture. Okay? First, we'll talk about the Native Americans who were in the United States before the arrival of the first settlers. So again, it's kind of hard to see the pictures. Maybe we'll buy a bigger screen for future presentations, but there were hundreds of different Native American cultures with their own culture and history and languages all over North America. And when European settlers first arrived, they met these Native Americans, and as you know, that meeting gave birth to America's greatest holiday, Thanksgiving, when American settlers and a Native American tribe called the Wampanoags in 1621, they celebrated the first successful harvest. But that friendship did not last forever. And within 50 years, the relations had gone downhill. And it resulted in a conflict known as the First Indian War in 1675, which was the first war between the colonists and the Native Americans. And so that started conflict between the Native Americans and the people who were coming to settle America. Now, it wasn't always conflict. It wasn't always friendship. It changed back and forth. And so I want to talk about a special, well-known Native American who created a language. His name was Sequoyah, and he was part of the Cherokee Native American nation. And Sequoyah was brilliant. He created his own alphabet made of syllables from the language. And by 1830, 90% of the Cherokee Nation were illiterate and could read thanks to this man. But he faced opposition because at first, people in his village, when he was coming up with this alphabet, thought that he was a witch or that he was practicing magic. But he continued on, and 90% of the Cherokee people became literate, which is a great accomplishment. And now, I don't know if you've seen it, but in California, they have huge trees called redwoods, trees that are about the size of this room, that are thousands of years old. And they're also called sequoia trees in his honor. And we honor him in that way. Now, later, as time passed in the 1830s, there was a sad event, a tragic event, called the Trail of Tears, in which these tribes from southeastern United States, from Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, were taken from that area and brought hundreds, even thousands of miles to Oklahoma, where the land was not as good, and they were forced out by the settlers, which is a very sad, sad thing that happened. And in general, Native Americans were discriminated against. However, in 1924, thanks to the Snyder Act, Native Americans finally received American citizenship. And at that point, they finally became members of the American nation. And in 1975, the government, the U.S. government, through what's called the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, they allowed Native American groups to control their own education policies, to be able to control how their children would learn information about their culture and be able to continue their own traditions. Okay. So with each group that I talk about, I'll talk about two incredible people from that group. The first one, this beautiful woman on the left, her name is Maria Tall Chief. So Maria Tall Chief, her story is incredible. She is a ballerina. She is the United States' first prima ballerina in our history. And she co-founded the New York City Ballet, which is one of the most famous ballets in the entire world. But she faced much difficulty in her career when she first went to perform in Europe, in Paris. The newspapers wrote, "Redskin dances in Paris," because redskin is a bad name to call Native Americans. And at that time, even like today, most of the famous ballerinas were Slavic origin. And so they said that if Maria Tallchief wanted to be successful, that she should name herself Talchieva. She should change her name to Talchieva to make it sound more like she was from Russia or somewhere. But she continued on and she had great success, and she's one of America's greatest dancers. We also have Jim Thorpe, one of America's greatest athletes. He was originally from Oklahoma. He became an orphan at age 16, but despite this, he was a star in basketball, American football, lacrosse, baseball, boxing, and hockey. One of the most incredible American athletes to ever live. And in 1912, he won Olympic gold medals for the pentathlon and decathlon. Incredible achievements. So the next group that I want to talk about, but again, before getting to immigration, is African Americans and how African Americans came to the United States. So first, I need to talk about how they arrived. So, from the 1500s all the way to the 1800s, there was something called the transatlantic slave trade. And during this time, between 10 and 12 million Africans were taken from Africa to the Americas. Not just to the United States, but United States, Jamaica, Brazil. Brazil had the largest number of slaves come from Africa. But during this time, during the entire time of the slave trade, more than 10 to 12 million people came. And in 1850, just to give you an idea, in 1850, London had 1 million inhabitants. So it was as if 10 Londons had been taken from Africa to the Americas. Now, how did this trade work? How did the slave trade work? It was a triangle. So the triangle was this. Europe would take clothing, alcohol, guns, firearms, weapons, take that to Africa, trade it for human beings, and then the human beings would cross the Atlantic on a boat. You can see in this picture how they were packed into these boats, where many of them died from sickness and illness. And after they had crossed the Atlantic, there on plantations, they would make cotton and sugar, and that cotton and sugar would go back to Europe, at which point the process would start all again in a triangle. Now, the Africans who came to the United States and other places did not accept this. They fought, they resisted. Some of them jumped off the sides of the boats. Some of them sabotaged tools on the plantation where they worked. Some of them organized revolts against their owners. And the most famous of those revolts took place in Haiti, where Africans revolted against their French masters and defeated armies led by Napoleon, or of the Napoleonic Empire, that was one of the strongest empires in the world. So now I'd like to talk about two very interesting people from the African American community. First is Robert Smalls, this man on the left. His story is incredible. He was a slave, and his master, seeing that he was very talented, he would rent Robert out to pilot boats, to pilot ships in Charleston, which was a harbor in South Carolina. And when the Civil War started, Robert Smalls realized that this was his chance. So one night, he brought his family and 9 other families of slaves. They snuck on to a warship, a Confederate warship, because in the Civil War it was the Union in the north and the Confederacy in the south. And he snuck those families onto a Confederate warship, and he piloted that boat away and escaped to the north on the boat. And the Union saw how incredibly talented he was, and he was the first African American to ever command a U.S. naval military ship. And after the Civil War was ended, he took the prize money that he got for bringing that boat to the Union side. He took that prize money that he got for that boat, went back to the South as a free man, and bought his former owner's house. Incredible, right? But he didn't stop there. In 1874, he was one of the first African Americans elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He was one of the first, quote unquote, members of Parliament of the United States from the African American community. And on his gravestone, where he was buried, there is a quote from him that says, "My race needs no special defense. Their history in this country proves them to be the equal of any man anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life." And our second notable African American is Katherine Johnson. Has anyone seen the movie Hidden Figures or read the book? No? Well, you should. We have the book translated from English to Kyrgyz. It's around here. And you should see the movie. The movie is incredible. So Katherine Johnson was a former math teacher. She integrated West Virginia University Graduate School. Before she arrived in 1939 at that school, there were no black people. She was the first one there. And later she began to work for NASA. And she did work to prepare the flight for the first ever manned space flight, which was Freedom 7 in 1961. And she was the subject of this movie, Hidden Figures, which you should totally see because it's an amazing movie. So, Katherine Johnson, a hero. Now we're going to talk about the first wave of immigration. So, to me, this is a really interesting story because many of my ancestors came during this first wave. But many of the people who arrived during this first wave, they also had a problem. The cost of getting from Europe to the United States on a ship was very, very expensive. This cost, the ticket for this ship, exceeded half a year's income for a typical British immigrant and a full year's income for a typical German immigrant. So, what did they do in order to be able to afford the ticket? These individuals who came agreed to come as indentured servants, meaning when they arrived, they were free, but they owed years sometimes of work in advance as a loan to be able to come to America. And some scholars believe that between half and 3/4 of European immigrants arriving in the colonies came as indentured or redemptioner servants. So a lot of these people during this first wave, they were fleeing religious persecution People from England, they wanted to come because they wanted to practice their religion freely, and they knew in the United States they could. Later on, for instance, Germany, there was a failed democratic revolution in 1848 in Germany, and many of the people fled during that time to the United States, settling, for instance, in my state, Wisconsin, where many of the place names are in German. Others, such as the Irish, they fled from the potato famine. There was a terrible, terrible potato famine in the 1840s in which many, many thousands of Irish people died, and they also fled to America. So people were coming to America for opportunity because there was political repression or there was famine, and so these people were coming there to hopefully create a new lives for themselves. Now, oftentimes, when you have new people coming, the people who have been there before, they don't feel comfortable with the arrival of these new people. So there was a backlash. A backlash is when there's resistance to these new people. And so the backlash created this party. It was a political party called the Know Nothing Party. And they were opposed to these new immigrants, such as the German or the Irish. And they wanted to prevent them from gaining political power or from gaining their rights in society. And that backlash was continuing to grow until the time of the American Civil War. And what you saw was these new immigrants showing that they were just as patriotic, that they had just as much love for America as everyone else. And you can see here in the bottom left corner, there's a picture of these Civil War soldiers. They were called the Irish Brigade. It was almost all immigrants from Ireland. And this Irish Brigade was known for their courage and determination and victory in battle. And many of them gave the ultimate sacrifice. Many of them gave their lives so that the United States could continue and that the South, the Confederacy, would be defeated in the American Civil War. And you can see on their flag, if you Google them, the Irish Brigade, their flag even has the harp. The harp is the symbol of Ireland. So let me talk about these two really interesting people. On the left, we have John Muir. He was a Scottish-born immigrant. He was a writer, inventor, and conservationist. A conservationist is someone who wants to preserve nature. So I picked him because he's a great man, but I also picked him because he went to University of Wisconsin-Madison like me. I mentioned he was an inventor. He even created an invention of a bed that was connected to an alarm clock. And so when the alarm would go, the bed would tip over and throw him out of bed so that he would just get right up and go in the morning. He's a very interesting person. And he, along with Teddy Roosevelt, is known for creating America's system of national parks. So think about that. An immigrant came to America and worked with the president to create a national park system. It's incredible. The second immigrant that we're talking about is Mother Jones. She was famous because she worked very hard to promote the rights of workers. I mentioned immigration and industrialization. At that time, many children worked in factories, for example. They did not have a chance to go to school. They only worked in factories at textile mills, for example, making clothing. And so in 1903, she organized a march of mill children, of these children who worked in these factories, to publicize the issue. So the second wave of industrialization is kind of the most well-known wave, right? Because at that point in time, we have the creation of, I think, the most famous symbol of the United States. Does anyone know what that is? The Statue of Liberty. So, does anyone know where the Statue of Liberty came from? Yes. You, sir. Very good. Do you know who designed the Statue of Liberty? So, the Statue of Liberty was designed by the same French architect and engineer who designed the Eiffel Tower, Gustave Eiffel. I guess that's how you say it in French. Probably not. I'm sorry. But so, in the second wave of immigration from the 1880s to the 1920s, more than 20 million people immigrated to the United States. And in 1886, the Statue of Liberty was built on Ellis Island in New York City. And there's a poem on the statue by Emma Lazarus. And it reads in part, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, templess tossed to me. I lift my lamp besides the golden door." So partially thanks to this poem that's talking about how America is going to take in all of these poor people from all over the world, New York City became known as the Golden Door because so many people came through that door to the United States. And this island alone, from 1892 to 1954, 12 million immigrants came through Ellis Island to make their lives in the United States. Now, the pace of immigration during this time was so high that by 1910, almost 15% of the population was born outside of the United States. So out of 20 people, that would mean that 3 were born outside of the United States. But in the big cities, the number was much higher. And again, like last time I mentioned before, there was again a backlash. Kind of some people rejected these new immigrants because many of them came from Southern and Eastern Europe this time. Many Italians, many Russians, Ukrainians, Polish people who were coming to the United States during this time. And so in 1924, there was an immigration act that banned immigrants from Asia and favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. But I would like to talk about 2 very fascinating immigrants to the United States during this period. The first one is Enrico Fermi. Can anyone guess where he's from? Italy. Yeah. So Enrico Fermi was from Italy. He moved to the United States, to New York, 9 months before World War II started. And in 1938, again, before that, he won the Nobel Prize for discovering how to break the atom. He basically discovered nuclear fission. I think it's fission or fusion, one of those two. Sorry. And he worked very hard on the Manhattan Project, which allowed the United States to create the first nuclear weapon. So again, imagine we have this immigrant come who contributes so much to the scientific development of the United States. And the second immigrant that I like to mention, because she has an incredible story, her name is Hedy Lamarr. She was born in Austria, but her parents were Jewish. One was from Ukraine and the other one was from Hungary. In the 1930s, she was married to a German arms dealer. He sold weapons. But she escaped her marriage, went to London, then she went to Hollywood, where she was discovered as this talented actress. She became one of the most famous actresses of her generation, one of the most beautiful women in the world. But not only was she an incredible actress, she was also an amazing scientist. Hedy Lamarr is known as the mother of Wi-Fi. So all of you using Wi-Fi, basically she and one other person created a technology that's called frequency jumping that Bluetooth and Wi-Fi use. So this is the mother of Wi-Fi. Incredible. All right. That brings us to the third wave of migration. So, a few different things to mention here. The third wave of migration includes migrants who came due to conflicts from the Cold War. So, migrants from Cuba who were running away from Fidel Castro, from the Korean War, from the Vietnam War, from Cambodia. And so a lot of these groups came to the United States because of these Cold War conflicts. And in the Immigration Act of 1965, before I had said that there was preferences for Northern and Western European immigrants. But in the Immigration Act of 1965, for the most part, those quotas and those preferences were removed, and it gave everyone from all over the world a more equal chance of immigrating to the United States. And it made the priority family immigration. So immigration because, someone is married to an American, they bring in their spouse, or because, I immigrated to the United States and my mother is a foreigner, so I would bring my mother to the United States to stay with me, stuff like that. So, and so that has been the main objective of immigration. And since then, now the majority of immigrants come from Asia and Latin America. And I said that in 1910, that 15% of the foreign-born population, of the population of the United States was born outside of America. Today, that number is about 14%. So we're again approaching that high. And that is in 2018, that was about 44 million people. So 44 million people in America who are doing so much to contribute and to make America an incredible place that it is, were born outside of the United States. And I'm thankful every day for all of the contributions of those people. Bless you. Now, that's not to say that there's no controversy over immigration. There is. I'm not going to kind of deny that fact. That said, according to Pew Research, most immigrants in the United States, 77%, do have legal status. They are there legally. They are not breaking the law. But about 1/4 of the immigrants in the United States are there illegally. And that number is estimated to be about 11 million people. And in 2022, along the US-Mexico border, there were more than 2 million people arrested for intending to immigrate, which is the highest number ever. So, there is political controversy over immigration. But again, it's important to take a moment to think about the incredible contributions of immigrants to the United States today. So here, on the left, we have Sundar Pichai. He was born in India, Chennai. When he was growing up, Sundar Pichai's family did not own a car, a TV, or even a telephone. He got his undergraduate degree from a university in India, but then he went to the United States and got a graduate degree from Stanford. And How many of you here use Chrome when you use for Googling things? Chrome? Only 4? Okay. All right. Well, I know you all use Chrome. Don't lie. Anyway, so he was very heavily involved in developing the Chrome browser that we use today. And now he's in 2020, he became CEO of Alphabet, which is the company that is above Google, that owns Google. So he is one of the most powerful men in the United States, and he's an immigrant. I'd also like to recognize Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. She's a Cuban-born immigrant. Her family fled from Castro, but she was also a U.S. congressperson. She was the first Cuban American in the U.S. Congress. And she was elected in 1989. And Fidel Castro even called her La Loba Feroz, which means the ferocious wolf. So she was a well-known congressperson and made a great contribution to the politics of the United States. So in conclusion, I'd like to say a few different things, but no matter what you believe about immigration today, we can all recognize, just based on the stories that we heard today about the people who have come to the United States, diversity and immigration plays a huge role in America's history and development, and they're continuing to make those contributions today. For example, immigrants to the United States are more likely than native-born Americans to open businesses. Statistically more likely than native-born Americans to open businesses. I believe that's because they come to the United States and they want to take advantage of those opportunities that they may not have had in their home countries. And again, that makes America richer. That makes America a better place to live and to work and to enjoy your freedoms in life. And despite controversies, Americans do support immigration. Gallup polls say that 70% of the United States, of the people in the United States, say that immigration is a good thing. So there's strong consensus. Consensus means agreement. There's strong agreement that immigration is something that is good and has been good for the United States. And because I can't speak as well as our president, I can't speak as well as him, but in his final speech as president, President Ronald Reagan gave a beautiful speech about immigrants and immigration. And with that, I will close with his incredible speech.
Since this is the last speech that I will give as president, I think it's fitting to leave one final thought, an observation about a country which I love. It was stated best in a letter I received not long ago. A man wrote me and said, "You can go to live in France, but you cannot become a Frenchman. You can go to live in China or Turkey or Japan, but you cannot become a German, a Turk, or Japanese. But anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American." Yes, the torch of Lady Liberty symbolizes our freedom and represents our heritage, the compact with our parents, our grandparents, and our ancestors. It is that lady who gives us our great and special place in the world. For it's the great life force of each generation of new Americans that guarantees that America's triumph shall continue unsurpassed into the next century and beyond. Other countries may seek to compete with us, but in one vital area, as a beacon of freedom and opportunity that draws the people of the world, no country on earth comes close. This, I believe, is one of the most important sources of America's greatness. We lead the world because, unique among nations, we draw our people, our strength, from every country and every corner of the world.
So now, once they turn the volume down, so now we're going to open up for some question and answers, and I'm going to invite my colleague from the U.S. Embassy, Catherine Hansen, who is the financial management officer who deals with all of the financial considerations and the payroll and the grants and the procurement and all of the things that make the embassy go. I'm going to invite her to join me as well to talk a little bit about her experience with diversity and immigration in the United States as well. So please join me in welcoming Catherine. Well, she can go ahead and start.
This on. Okay, here. So, as Nolan said, my name is Catherine Hansen, but I believe some of you already start to guess maybe where I'm really coming from. Any guesses?
Any guesses?
Okay, Korea. What else? Japan. Okay. What else? Well, nobody guessed I'm from Kyrgyzstan? No? I look like one of you. Okay, I'm not from Kyrgyzstan, unfortunately. I'm from China. So close, you guys are very close. But actually what's interesting, when I came here on my first trip from Istanbul to Bishkek, there's a couple ladies approached me saying, hey, are you from Kazakhstan? And of course, they were speaking in kind of Russian, and I'm really not very good in Russian. So I said, what? But that tells me that I can be one of you very easily, am I? Right? But that is just a little story about me. But I was born and raised in China. I did not go to United States until I was 31. So my majority time was spent in China. And many of you, and I look at you and I'm thinking about the time I spent in my motherland in China, and then that's some of you remind me of my younger age. But anyway, so I'm here today, and as Nolan said, I'm the financial management officer for the U.S. Embassy, and it is my greatest honor to represent United States, to travel around the world, to work for this greatest country ever. And I never will forget my birth country, China, and I pay attention to what's happening there. But any moment you ask me, that's my country. I will die for her, I will live for her, I will work for her. So, and nothing really, with that doesn't mean that I want to say is that it's not because what I do, it's because what this country did to me. And the famous President Kennedy once said, don't ask what the country can do for you, but ask yourself what you can do for your country. Now, the American already did for you, for me, for everybody. So now it's time for the country to ask us to help this country to continue to be the greatest country in the world. So that's my opening remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions, any curious questions, whatever you want to shoot.
So does anyone have any questions either for Catherine or for me? Either one? I can mention, for instance, my family's immigration history, my family came from mostly from Northern Europe, Norway mostly. So we have a flat bread that we make called lefse, but our bread is made out of potatoes. I bet you've never eaten bread made out of potatoes. So, you know, that's our lepioshka. You have lepioshka, we have lefse. So those are my roots, generally from Norway. Unfortunately, I've never been to Norway to visit. But there are, for instance, there's a town right outside of the town where I grew up in Madison, where they do celebrate Norwegian Independence Day. And I think it's important to note that, you know, when people go to the United States, as Catherine said, it doesn't mean that they forget where they came from. You can hold on to that. You can cherish that. You can love where you came from, and you can continue to have those connections. For instance, when I met with the Kyrgyz diaspora in Chicago, you know, Chicago, the capital of Kyrgyzstan in the United States. So when I met with the Kyrgyz diaspora in Chicago, and they've created a community center. And on the weekends, you know, they teach their children Kyrgyz so that they don't forget. They don't forget where their family came from. They have special kumuz. They'll play kumuz for the kids. They'll have manaschi come. They do everything to keep traditions alive. And I think that's the beautiful thing about going to America and being American, is especially in our biggest cities, that you can find every country in the world represented there. When you're on the subway in New York, you'll hear dozens of different languages. And I think that's something special. And that's one of the things I do love about the United States. So, with that, would anyone have any questions, any comments, anything they'd like to add? Raise your hand. No? Please. Thank you, Nazira.
Everyone, my name is Nazira and I work as a teacher at Bishkek State University. Thank you so much for such an informative presentation. It was very enlightening, and welcome to Kyrgyzstan and to our presentation again today. So I have a question. So the question is about these successful stories of immigrants. Have you ever told somebody about the stories, and did they provoke a strong and positive response? And could you tell about their reaction to these stories? That would be interesting. And the question for Ms. Catherine, right? Yes. Could you please tell about one of the challenges that you faced during your first years in America, and how did you overcome them? And what helped you to be as strong as you are now? Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a great question. So in general, for every immigrant who the first time enters the United States, you will be very shocked. Shocked in many ways. One is that your language, and you, even though you think that you're very good when you are speaking in foreign country, you think you are speaking English, you may not necessarily communicate effectively in United States. Meaning that there's United States as a even combined, a diversified country, has its unique majority, like they call the slang. So I think every person who goes through this process, I think the first thing you need to know what you are lack of, meaning that compared to a normal American, what I need to improve myself on. And then I think the language is what I focus on. But don't get me wrong, my English was really good, but I studied British English. So it's have a limitation, there's difference, right? And also I had no idea what slang is at that time. So I just spent time to improve myself in that respect. And then another thing is, I come from China, so population was very dense, a little bit like here in Bishkek, the city. So when I first entered United States territory, it was very shocking, but also a little bit disappointing. Is that to say I don't see anybody on the street. So it's almost like, where's everybody? So it's a little bit like, what's the fun of this? So there's a little bit adjustment to that. So this is just a kind of culture life, that side. And for me, as I said, I went to United States when I was 31, so I already have an established career in China. So I actually was running a big department in China Construction Bank, if you guys have ever heard of that. So when I went to US, because of my language limitation, I knew I need to start from the bottom. So I chose a job as tailor, which is at 31, start all over again. It's a little bit difficult for me, but those are things that you need to be aware of before your immigration, so you can prepare yourself mentally and even know there's some hardship coming with that, because Taylor does not provide a good financial support for anybody, and overcome is come by time. It's not overnight. It's a process. And then even today, I'm still learning. So I don't think I will ever overcome. I'm an immigrant, meaning that I still cannot understand some things that the United States people come natural to them. I did not grow up there. That's the limitation. And then there's some famous movies which I never, sometimes they quote. I have no idea what they're talking about. So once I know what's that about, so I actually educated myself. I need to watch this movie just for this purpose. So that's what I did. So I hope that answered a little bit of your question. So thank you. That's a great question.
And you, although yes, you mentioned the hardship and overcoming the hardship, but everyone at the embassy knows you're a great financial management officer. So don't be modest, or don't be so modest.
Thank you very much.
So I mean, I can say in terms of sharing the stories. So this is only the second time I've done this presentation before, but I think the thing that's really interesting for me is a lot of the people, when I talked about these individuals, they're like, oh, why haven't they done a movie about that person? So for instance, like Robert Smalls, to me, his story is incredible and it should be a movie. Or Hedy Lamarr, this woman who, why hasn't there been a biography of Hedy Lamarr, of her, marriage to this bad guy who's almost like an evil villain, who's a German weapons dealer, and then she goes to London, and then someone in Hollywood discovers her. She becomes an incredibly famous actress. She creates all this technology. So a lot of people are kind of shocked that that Hollywood hasn't taken these examples and made them into films, because I guess they just want to make Marvel movies instead. But anyway, we'll keep our fingers crossed for the Robert Smalls biography movie. Any other questions? We'd love to answer some. It doesn't have to be about the presentation either. You can ask us about what it's like being a diplomat. You can ask us, who's our favorite author, whatever you have, whatever questions you'd like. Or we can all just go, but it depends on you.
Would like to know your view about, for example, using the history of the United States as a right path to overcome a lot of problems in different nations. As we know, any history has a tendency to be repeated by different nations. And for example, nowadays in Asia, in some countries of Africa, in some Slavic countries, there are some minorities that are oppressed by the official, for example, power, by official government, and maybe it's going to be for them best example. United States history can be a best example for them that force is not always the best way to solve the problems which they face. And for example, as you were telling about the history of the United States, there were, for example, diversity. Maybe in the beginning it led to clash between different, for example, people from different countries, but at the same time, over some time, they realize that contributing to the country, to the society where they live, can make their all their lives make better. I want to know your view about, in common, about the using of history in the United States as an example, how they can solve their own problems.
Thank you. That's a great question. So of course, as an American, I'm going to say, well, yes, of course, you should look at the United States history as an example. But, I think really the fundamental principle is, generally the ideal that we strive to is accepting our neighbors and being tolerant of our neighbors and saying, yes, my neighbor may look different than me. Maybe they speak some other language. Maybe they have a different history. Maybe they have different religious practices. But at the end of the day, they want many of the same things I do. They want a good education for their children. They want to find a good job. They want to live in a safe neighborhood, and that we are all have a common interest, like you said, in working together to make those things happen. But there's also other examples. I mean, for instance, I hesitate to just talk about the United States because, yes, I do believe that the United States is an exceptional country, but there's other examples like, for instance, India. India is a huge country with more than 1 billion people, and they have been able, at least since independence, to hold themselves together as a democracy. Yes, of course, each country has its own difficult times and difficult spots when there are tensions and there's maybe conflicts between different groups. But I think that as long as we all do our very best to believe the best about our neighbors and to believe the best about the people who are citizens of our country, that we can always find the best way forward. Thank you. That's a great question.
So if I can add a little bit, is that from an immigrant standpoint, opportunities are equal for everybody in the United States. I think that's the greatest of this country, is that they don't, well, let me put it this way. It is equal for everybody, but it's not equal for everybody. Let me explain what I mean. See, opportunity is there. It's not restricted to whether you are from Italy or you are from China, you are from Korea or Kyrgyzstan. It's there. Whether you can get it or not is up to you. So you are the one who control, who have the ability or freedom in United States to control your effort, how much effort you put into it to achieve that goal. I think that's the greatest about the United States is just the freedom. Nolan mentioned in his presentation as well. Freedom, sometimes we take it for granted. We don't think about it as so great. But if you think a little bit further, if you don't have freedom, you cannot even freely to chase your dream. And the United States provide that platform for everybody who come to United States, start from the same level, same line, to chase your dream. It's all, whether you succeed or not, it's up to you yourself. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
So it was a great presentation. Thank you. It was very informative. And so from the presentation, we can see that a lot of people from many other nations made a big contribution to the United States culture and to the country. So all that being said, why there are still politicians that are against immigration, and it's a controversial policy.
So thank you. That's a really good question. And first of all, I want to compliment you on your English. You guys, the questioners your English is pretty incredible. So, as I mentioned before, so for instance, I just showed the video of Ronald Reagan, who's a very famous Republican president, talking about immigration and how much it has contributed to the United States. I think that most of the controversy isn't fundamentally about immigration. It's just about how immigration should happen. It isn't about whether immigration should or shouldn't be, whether we should just close the borders and not let anyone else in or not. People are trying to decide in what ways people should. And I think that's kind of where the argument and the kind of back and forth politically comes, because most politicians and most people in the United States agree that immigration is good. The question is how, what are the mechanisms by which people should immigrate? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's more of a technical question, but a lot of people have a lot of feelings about how that technical question should be answered. That's really the best answer I can give you. But thank you. That's a good question.
Hello. My question is more personal and it's not related with today's topic, but I wanted to ask you, what is the education for you and why people have to get it? And yeah, we all understand that it's important, but like, for example, me, I understand everything, but at the same time, maybe because we live in Kyrgyzstan and the education here is not like, in high level. I don't know the reason why we have to get it, like the exact reason, like reason that will make us do more success.
So I can give you my personal perspective about education. I love education because it doesn't teach me to think, it teaches me how to think. What do I mean by that? So for instance, I was telling Nazira and her students that I love studying languages. I've studied Portuguese and Spanish and Arabic and Russian and some French, and I love languages. And I love discovering what languages tell you about cultures. And I love finding the mathematical connections between the languages. And I love that moment when I've gotten to such a good point in a language that I'm dreaming in Spanish or Portuguese, and I know that I can do it. And so by learning about language, I feel like each time I unlock a new language, it changes the way my mind is structured. Scientists say that when you learn new things, it physically changes your brain. It changes your brain kind of looks like it has canyons, written into it. So as you're learning, those canyons change and move and form, and your brain is reshaping and constantly learning. And then in terms of other things that I love about learning and how it teaches me how to think, like when I studied history, to understand about how different historical concepts can be applied across the world, or how different trends repeat themselves. And then, when I did my MBA taught me to take apart a process, any process. It could be the process of applying for a driver's license and look at each different part of the process and analyze it, and how long did it take, what is you doing, and everything like that. And that excitement of understanding things. Don't do the education for the grades. Do it for your own satisfaction. Because if you do it for your own satisfaction and for your own personal growth, you will get good grades. but try and study things that you enjoy. Try and study things that gives you growth. You know, I look at my mother. My mother is 83 years old. I was an no 80. No, excuse me. Sorry, mom. My mother is 80. She's 86 years old in April. She'll turn 86 in April. I was an accident. Anyway, that's not really relevant. So my mother turns 86 years old, and she still is constantly reading books and trying to learn new things and doing new experiences. And I hope that each one of you, when you are 86 years old, are still learning, still educating, not in the sense of necessarily getting a diploma, but still growing intellectually as a person, because your life will be so much richer for it. I just found a new podcast, a history podcast the other day that I love, called The Rest is History. And I'm so excited by that. It adds so much joy for me to be able to listen to that while I work out. So, you know, don't ever give up on education. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Thank you, first of all, answer for question. I have a question. Which system you like, you don't like United States about immigration? Which system do you like United States about immigration? Which don't like system United States about immigrations? You understand?
Well, that's a good question. I can say that okay. Well, all right. How about this? I would say that if I was president for the day, could make one change. If I was president for the day and the Senate and the House all were ready to do whatever I suggested, and I could make one change to the immigration system in the United States, I would give permanent residency to any foreign student who finished a university degree in the United States. That would be my one change. If I were to make a change, that would be what I would. But it's not really for me to say, as a government employee, what I like or don't like or anything like that. We, as civil servants, it is our duty to apply the laws that have been created by the Congress, that have been created by Congress and signed by the president. And so whatever the laws are, we are following those immigration laws. But if I were president for a day, that would be the one change. Good question. Thank you.
Um, so if I can start, yeah. So I studied economics when I was in college in China, and I thought I would do international trade after I graduate, which I did. I loved it, but after I immigrated to the United States, it did not work, meaning that I could not find a job in that field. It's not, nobody will willingly to take me into that international trade at the level that I was. So, so I went back to school. I studied accounting, finance, accounting. So the most difficult part of my life is to pass the CPA exam. Anybody knows what's that? It's very difficult, yeah. However, that opens the door for my job as auditor for, you know, like I'm not really, you guys know what an auditor is, right? No, it's accounting, so I went up having a job to work for the federal government. And then another risk I took was to apply for the foreign service. And that's another brutal hurdle. Nolan can endorse that. Is brutal. I mean, from the time I apply to pass the application system to be hired, it took 5 years. So, I mean, you cannot. I mean, it's a risk, meaning that you may never get it, but it is risk that I was willing to pay for it. And today, look back, I'm so glad I took that risk, both risks. And then they both opened the doors that I have never dreamed of. So I would say take the risk if you have the opportunity to do. And the regret will not be you took the risk. The regret will that one day you look back, you think, I wish I had that opportunity. I wish I had took the risk at that time. So.
So my risk that I would say is it actually comes from here. I'm still here at the embassy in Bishkek, but I was the press attaché. I worked on social media a lot more. Now I'm doing kind of a different job. I got a promotion. Yes. But while I was doing that job, my colleague, who's Kyrgyz, he said, hey, what if we ask the famous pop singer Mirbek Adbekov to do karaoke? And I said, well, I mean, I can't sing. I don't sing well. And he's like, no, but we should do it. It'll be fun. And, and I talked a little bit more about it, and I kind of pushed away the fear. And I realized that what is the downside to asking someone to do something with you? What do you lose by them saying no? You don't lose anything. But if you never asked, maybe you lost so much. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask, because we did the karaoke, we sang Maras, and it was amazing. So don't be afraid to ask. Because as we mentioned, you don't want to have regrets about not asking. So make the ask. Put yourself out there. There's a good English phrase for you. Put yourself out there. That means like be vulnerable. Put yourself out there. Because if you're not out there, you're not going to win. Shoot your shot. That's another one. Put yourself out there. Shoot your shot. Take your shot. Anyway, great question. Thank you for that one. And I think that's it. Yeah? All right. This will be the last question. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. And I want to hear your first impression when you came to Kyrgyzstan. And did you know earlier Kyrgyzstan or not? It's really interesting for me, for us.
Okay.
First impression, and what surprised you when you came to Kyrgyzstan? Yeah.
So, to be completely honest, my family and I arrived in September 2020. And it was COVID times. Things were shut down. Then the Oktyabrskие события. But I will tell you that despite all of that, we were asked, they said, would you like to stay for a third year? And even though we had only been here like 2 weeks, we were like, yes, absolutely, we want to stay. And I can say that one of the things that I love every day is looking out my window and seeing those beautiful mountains. I've never lived in a place like this. Wisconsin doesn't have mountains. And I can say I love being in a place where no matter where you are in Kyrgyzstan, you can see a mountain. No matter where you are, there is always a mountain there. And it makes you feel, I don't know, close to God. You know, being close to the mountains. To me, that's just my personal opinion. But then, of course, other things that surprised me. You know, I have to say I've been to a toy, and oh my Lord, I've never seen such luxury as at a Kyrgyz toy. It's incredible, and I will always remember that. And when I showed video of a toy to my friends in the U.S., and they said, "Oh, are you friends with millionaires?" So I do appreciate, you know, the Kyrgyz way of being able to celebrate great events like marriages and, you know, births of children and everything like that. I think that's something that's really special. And so, and you know, you should be proud of that, because not everyone knows how to celebrate like you, and you know, good for you. So maybe I'll come back after I retire, and maybe I'll organize toys. Yes, for sure.
So I came in July this year. Actually, no, 2022. I did study about Kyrgyzstan before I came, just out of curiosity. And it's remind me so much about China about, I would say 20 years ago. You guys, their location, because we're border to Xinjiang province, and then the food, everything was little surprise, but in a good way. And I enjoy all of those. But above all of those, what is really pleasantly surprised me is you people. What I received from my staff and from the Kyrgyzstan people, even in the bazaar I went, their smile, their hospitality is beyond words. I'm very moved and very touched by that. So, and as Nolan said, you should be proud of yourself. This is, you guys are a great country, great nation, and then my husband and I were very glad to be here.